1984, Baltimore School for the Arts. Two teenagers meet in an acting class. Tupac Shakur, skinny, intense, selling drugs on the side to survive, and Jada Pinkett, small-town girl with big dreams, trying to find her place in the world. They shouldn't have connected, but they did. Instantly, completely, they became inseparable, best friends, soulmates, the kind of bond where you finish each other's sentences and know what the other is thinking without words. But they never dated, never kissed, never crossed that line, because some connections are too sacred to risk on romance, and some love stories aren't about being together, they're about never being able to let go. For 12 years, Tupac and Jada were each other's person, the one who knew the truth beneath the performance, the one who picked up the phone at 3 a.m., the one who said, "I see you," when the world only saw the image. And then on September 13, 1996, Tupac died, and Jada was left with a grief she couldn't name. Because how do you mourn someone who was never yours but always will be? This is the story of Tupac and Jada, the friendship that was more than friendship, the love that was never romantic but always real, and the ghost that would haunt Jada Pinkett Smith for the rest of her life. If you remember when real connections in hip-hop meant more than social media posts, subscribe. We're telling the stories about the bonds that actually mattered, the friendships that lasted, the love that didn't need labels. Hit that like button and let's preserve these memories together. Baltimore in the mid-1980s wasn't glamorous. It was rough, poor, the kind of city where talent either saved you or got buried under circumstance. The Baltimore School for the Arts was an oasis, a place where kids who didn't fit anywhere else could be artists, actors, dancers, poets, and in 1984, two of those misfits found each other. Tupac was 13, already shaped by a childhood most adults couldn't survive. His mother, Afeni, was a former Black Panther battling addiction. They'd moved constantly, New York to Baltimore, shelter to shelter. Tupac was smart, gifted, but he was also angry and scared and doing whatever he had to do to eat. He sold drugs, he got into fights, he wore a mask to survive the streets. But inside the walls of that school, the mask came off, and the first person who saw beneath it was Jada Pinkett. Jada was 13 too. She came from a working-class family in Baltimore. She was tiny, barely 5 feet tall, but fierce in a way that made people notice. She wanted to act, to escape the limitations of where she'd come from, and when she met Tupac in acting class, something clicked. She later described it as recognition, like they'd known each other in another life, like their souls had been searching for each other and finally found home. They became inseparable almost immediately. They ate lunch together, walked home together, talked on the phone for hours, and people assumed they were dating, but they weren't. They were something else, something deeper. Tupac called her his heart. Jada called him her soulmate, and for two teenagers navigating poverty and dreams and the weight of the world, that connection was everything. Here's what people often get wrong about Tupac and Jada. They assume the relationship was romantic and just never happened. But that's not it. They chose not to be romantic, consciously, deliberately, because they understood something most people don't figure out until much later in life. Some relationships are too important to risk on physical attraction or the complications of dating. Jada has said in interviews that they talked about it early on, and they both agreed that what they had was too precious to mess up, that if they dated and it didn't work out, they'd lose each other, and losing each other was unthinkable. So they stayed friends, best friends, soulmates. And for 12 years, that friendship was the most stable, honest, unconditional thing in either of their lives. At school, they were a unit. Tupac would perform Shakespeare in class, Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, and Jada would watch him transform. She saw the artist before the world did, the poet, the person who felt everything so deeply it hurt. And Tupac saw Jada's strength, her ambition, her refusal to be small just because the world expected her to be. They pushed each other, challenged each other, dreamed together about getting out of Baltimore and making it in Hollywood or New York or wherever opportunity lived. And when Tupac started writing rap lyrics, Jada was the first person he showed them to, not because she was a hip-hop expert, but because she was the only person whose opinion mattered, the only one who wouldn't judge or dismiss or try to change him. She just listened and believed. What does it mean to be someone's soulmate? It means they see you when you're still becoming, and they love you anyway. In 1988, Tupac's family moved to California. He was 17, Jada was 17, and for the first time since they'd met, they were separated by geography. No more walking home together, no more lunch in the cafeteria, no more sitting in acting class and communicating without words, just distance and phone calls. Long late-night phone calls, where they tried to keep the connection alive across 3,000 miles. Tupac was struggling. His mother was deep in addiction. He was homeless at times, sleeping on couches, selling drugs again, trying to break into the rap scene but hitting walls. And when things got too heavy, when he felt like he was drowning, he called Jada at 2 a.m., at 4 a.m., whenever the weight became unbearable, and she picked up every time, because that's what soulmates do. They show up, even when it's inconvenient, even when they have school the next morning, or auditions, or their own problems. They show up. Jada was building her own career. She'd moved to Los Angeles in the early 90s, trying to make it as an actress, and slowly, it was working. She landed small roles, then bigger ones. By 1991, she was cast in A Different World, the hit TV show. She was becoming famous, and so was Tupac. His music career was taking off. Tupacalypse Now, in 1991, roles in movies like Juice and Poetic Justice. They were both climbing toward the success they'd dreamed about in Baltimore. But the distance wasn't just physical anymore. It was circumstantial. They were in different orbits, moving at different speeds. And the phone calls, while still frequent, carried a new weight, the weight of lives diverging. There's a story Jada told in a 2018 interview that captures the essence of their relationship. In 1993, Tupac called her in the middle of the night. He was upset, paranoid. He'd been involved in a shooting in Atlanta. An off-duty police officer was killed, and Tupac claimed self-defense. The case was all over the news. He was facing serious charges, and he was scared, not of prison, but of losing himself, of becoming the thing the world wanted him to be, the violent thug, the criminal, the cautionary tale. And he told Jada, "I don't know how to be me anymore. Everybody wants Tupac the rapper. Nobody wants Lesane." Lesane was his birth name, the name his mother gave him before she changed it to Tupac Shakur, the name that represented who he was before the fame, before the persona. And Jada said something that stayed with him: "I still see Lesane, and Lesane is enough." That phone call lasted 4 hours, and when it ended, Tupac told her she'd saved his life. Not figuratively, literally. He'd been thinking about ending it, about walking away from everything, because he didn't recognize himself anymore. But Jada reminded him that someone still saw him, still knew him, still loved the person beneath the performance. That's what their relationship was. A lifeline for both of them. When the world demanded they be bigger, louder, tougher, more marketable, there was one person who said, "I know who you really are," and that's enough. They didn't need romance. They had something more essential. They had truth. How many people get to have one person in their life who knows them completely, who loves them not for what they've become, but for who they've always been? In 1994, Jada Pinkett met Will Smith. He was already a massive star. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air had made him a household name. He was charming, successful, safe in ways that Tupac wasn't. And they started dating. Jada has said in interviews that she liked Will immediately, that he made her laugh, that he was stable and ambitious, and everything you'd want in a partner. But there was one problem. Tupac hated him, not because Will was a bad person, but because Will wasn't Tupac. And Tupac knew, on some deep unspoken level, that if Jada married Will, he would lose her. Not completely, but in the way that matters. He'd no longer be the first call, the person she turned to when things fell apart. He'd become secondary, a memory, a before Will artifact, and that terrified him. Tupac never said this explicitly, but people close to both of them noticed. Mutual friends later described tension, awkward moments when Jada would mention Will and Tupac would go quiet, or change the subject, or make a joke that wasn't really a joke. He was jealous, but not in a romantic way. It was deeper than that. It was the jealousy of someone who knows they're about to be replaced. Not because they did anything wrong, but because life moves forward, and sometimes the people you love find other people to love, and there's nothing you can do but watch. In late 1994, Tupac was shot 5 times at Quad Recording Studios in New York. He survived, barely, and when he was recovering in the hospital, Jada flew to New York to see him. She later said it was one of the hardest moments of her life, because Tupac was different, harder, angrier. The shooting had broken something in him. He'd gone into that hospital as Lesane, the boy from Baltimore who believed in art and revolution and love, and he came out as Tupac, the warrior, the target, the man who trusted no one. And when Jada sat beside his hospital bed and tried to reach the person she knew, she couldn't find him. He was buried under trauma and rage and paranoia, and for the first time in 10 years, she felt like she was losing him, not to death, but to the persona, to the version of himself that the world demanded, and the streets rewarded, and the industry profited from. She asked him to walk away, to leave the rap game, to move somewhere quiet and focus on acting or poetry or anything that didn't involve guns and beefs and death row records. And Tupac looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language, because by late 1994 he was too deep, too committed, too famous to disappear, and he told her something she'd never forget. "I can't be Lesane anymore, Jada." Lesane got shot. Tupac survived. It was a line in the sand, a goodbye to the boy he used to be. And Jada knew, sitting in that hospital room, that the person she'd grown up with was slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. When someone you love chooses survival over softness, you can't blame them, but you can mourn what's lost. In 1995, while Tupac was in prison, Jada wrote him letters. She later said she wrote him every week, not about anything deep or philosophical, just life, what she was working on, movies she'd seen, stupid things that made her laugh, because she wanted him to know that even though he was locked up, even though the world had written him off as another black man in a cage, someone still saw him as human, someone still cared about the mundane details of his existence. And Tupac wrote back, not every week, but when he did, the letters were raw, vulnerable. He told her things he didn't tell anyone else, about how scared he was, how exhausted, how he didn't know if he'd survive the violence he'd become part of. And he ended every letter the same way: "You're the only one who still sees me." Those letters were never published. Jada has kept them private, because some things are sacred. Some things don't belong to the public, but people who know about them say they're proof of what Tupac and Jada had, not romance, but something arguably more intimate, complete, unguarded honesty, the kind you can only have with someone who's known you since before you became famous, before you became a brand, when you were just a kid trying to survive. Love isn't always about holding hands. Sometimes it's about holding space for someone when the rest of the world has moved on. Jada Pinkett married Will Smith on December 31st, 1997. Tupac had been dead for 15 months, and people close to Jada said the wedding was bittersweet, because she was marrying a man she loved, a man who was good to her, who made her feel safe and seen and valued. But there was a ghost at that wedding, an absence so loud it felt like presence. Tupac should have been there, in a different timeline, a different universe. He would have been, not as the groom, but as the person standing beside her, the one who'd known her since she was 13, who'd walked with her through every version of herself, who would have looked at her in her wedding dress and said something stupid and perfect that made her laugh through tears. But he wasn't there, because he was dead, and Jada had to marry Will Smith, knowing that the most important person in her life would never meet her husband, would never see her kids, would never grow old with her, would never be anything but a memory. Will Smith has been remarkably open about how Tupac's ghost affected his marriage. In interviews, he's admitted that for years he struggled with the idea that Jada loved someone before him, not in a romantic way, but in a way that he could never compete with, because Will met Jada when she was already formed, already successful, already guarded, but Tupac knew her when she was becoming, when she was vulnerable and unfinished and figuring out who she was. And that kind of intimacy, the intimacy of shared struggle and mutual becoming, is something you can't replicate later in life. Will has said he used to be jealous of Tupac, that he'd ask Jada about him and feel inadequate because no matter what he did, he couldn't be the person who'd known her first, who'd seen her before the fame, who'd loved her when loving her was just about showing up. And Jada has been honest too. She said that Tupac is a part of her that Will never fully understand, not because she doesn't love Will, but because some connections exist outside of time and logic and the neat categories we use to define relationships. In 2015, Jada started Red Table Talk, a web series where she, her daughter Willow, and her mother Adrienne have raw, unfiltered conversations about life. And inevitably, Tupac came up, a lot. Jada talked about him with a kind of reverence that made it clear, nearly 20 years after his death, the grief was still fresh. She described their friendship as the most honest relationship she'd ever had. She said Tupac was the only person who never wanted anything from her, who didn't need her to be Jada Pinkett Smith, the actress, the brand. He just needed her to be Jada, the girl from Baltimore, the one who understood. And she said losing him felt like losing a part of herself, the part that remembered who she was before Hollywood, before fame, before the performance. And without Tupac, she sometimes felt like she was forgetting, like the girl from Baltimore was disappearing under the weight of everything she'd become. In one particularly emotional episode, Willow asked her mother if she'd ever been in love with Tupac, and Jada paused for a long time. Then she said, "I loved him deeply, but it wasn't romantic love, it was soul love, the kind where you're connected in ways you don't have words for, where you die for each other, but you don't need to kiss or hold hands or call it a relationship. It just is." And then she cried, on camera, in front of millions of people. Because even after all those years, talking about Tupac broke something open, a grief she'd learned to carry but never fully processed. Because how do you process losing someone who was never yours in the way the world defines ownership, but was always yours in every way that mattered? Some people leave fingerprints on your soul, and when they're gone, you feel the absence every single day for the rest of your life. On September 13th, 1996, Jada Pinkett was in Los Angeles when she got the call. Tupac was dead. He'd been shot 6 days earlier in Las Vegas. He'd fought, he'd held on, but his body couldn't survive the damage, and at 4:03 p.m. he was gone. Jada later said the next few days were a blur. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't process the reality that Tupac, her Tupac, the boy from Baltimore, the one who called her at 3 a.m., the one who signed his letters, "You're the only one who still sees me," was never going to call again, never going to laugh at her jokes, or challenge her when she was being too safe, or remind her who she was when the world demanded she be someone else. He was just gone, and the world kept moving like nothing had changed. But for Jada, everything had changed. She didn't go to Tupac's funeral. She later explained that she couldn't, that it was too public, too performative, that she didn't want to grieve in front of cameras and reporters and people who didn't know him the way she did. She wanted to remember him privately, in her own way. So she stayed home, and she cried, and she wrote, and she tried to make sense of a loss that didn't fit any category, because Tupac wasn't her boyfriend, he wasn't her husband, he wasn't family in the legal sense, but he was family in every other sense, and the world doesn't have a word for that kind of grief, the grief of losing someone who was never yours but always will be. In 2017, Tupac Shakur was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Jada was invited to speak, to represent the people who'd known him before the legend, before the mythology, before the conspiracy theories, and the posthumous albums, and the hologram at Coachella, and she accepted. She walked onto that stage, 21 years after his death, and she tried to talk about who Tupac really was. But she couldn't. She broke down, on stage, in front of everyone. Her voice cracked, her hands shook, and she said through tears, "Pac was one of my best friends. He was like a brother. He was a poet. He was so much more than what you saw, and I miss him every single day." The audience gave her a standing ovation, but she barely noticed. Because in that moment, she wasn't Jada Pinkett Smith, the famous actress. She was Jada from Baltimore, the 13-year-old girl who met a skinny kid in acting class and found her soulmate, and she was saying goodbye again, for the millionth time, because grief doesn't end. You just learn to live with it, or you don't. People who were close to Jada during that time said the Hall of Fame speech took everything out of her, that she spent weeks preparing, trying to find the right words, trying to distill 12 years of friendship and 21 years of grief into a few minutes. And in the end, she couldn't. Because you can't summarize a soulmate, you can't reduce a connection that deep to a speech or a soundbite or a highlight reel. You can only feel it and hope that people understand when words fail. And when Jada walked off that stage, she reportedly went backstage and sobbed, not because she'd embarrassed herself, but because saying Tupac's name out loud in front of the world made the loss real all over again. And she realized, 21 years later, she still wasn't over it, and she might never be. There's no timeline for grief, no expiration date. You just carry it, and some days it's a whisper, and some days it's a scream. Tupac Shakur died at 25 years old. Jada Pinkett was 25 when he died. They'd known each other for 12 years, half their lives, and in those 12 years they'd been through everything together. Poverty, fame, betrayal, success, fear, hope, and now 29 years after his death, Jada is in her 50s. She's had a full life, a career, a marriage, kids, accomplishments, but Tupac is still 25, frozen in time, forever young, forever the boy from Baltimore who became a legend, and Jada lives with that strange reality. She's aged, but her soulmate hasn't. She's grown and changed and evolved, but Tupac is exactly as he was in 1996, and she can never talk to him about who she's become, can never ask him what he thinks about her choices, can never laugh with him about how wild their lives turned out. He's just a memory, a ghost, a presence that shaped her but can never evolve with her, and that's the cruelest part of losing someone young. They don't just die, they stop growing, and you have to grow without them. You have to make decisions they'll never weigh in on, have experiences they'll never share, and every milestone, every birthday, every achievement, every moment of joy is tainted by the knowledge that they're not there to see it. Jada has lived with that for 29 years, and she'll live with it for the rest of her life. Because when you lose your soulmate, you don't just lose a person, you lose the future you thought you'd have together, the conversations you'll never finish, the inside jokes that die with them, the version of yourself that only existed when they were around. Some people are meant to walk with you your whole life, and some people are meant to shape you and then leave, and the ones who leave, they never really go, they just become part of who you are. There's a moment in a 2018 Red Table Talk episode that captures everything about Jada and Tupac's relationship. Willow asks her mother, if Tupac were alive today, what would you say to him? And Jada doesn't hesitate. She says, I'd tell him I'm sorry for not saving him, for not being enough, for letting him go to Las Vegas that night, for not picking up the phone the one time he might have needed me most. And then she pauses and adds, but I'd also tell him thank you for seeing me, for loving me in a way no one else ever has, for being my safe place when the world was too loud, and for giving me the gift of knowing what it feels like to be truly understood. Even if it was only for 12 years, even if I lost you, it was worth it. That's the paradox of their story. Jada wouldn't trade those 12 years for anything, even knowing how it ends, even knowing she'd spend the rest of her life grieving, because what they had was real and rare. And in a world full of performance and transaction, and people who only love you for what you can give them, having one person who just loves you for existing, that's everything. Tupac gave Jada that, and Jada gave it to Tupac, and maybe that's why they never dated, because they knew on some level that what they had was too precious to risk, that if they tried to make it romantic and it didn't work, they'd lose the one thing that made life bearable, so they stayed friends, soulmates. The person the other called at 3 a.m., and they loved each other in a way that didn't need labels or definitions or societal approval. They just loved completely, unconditionally, forever. In 2020, Jada posted a video on social media. It was old footage, Tupac and Jada in their early 20s, goofing around on a beach somewhere, laughing, young, alive, and the caption was simple, missing you. That post got millions of views, thousands of comments, people reminiscing about their friendship, speculating about what could have been, debating whether they were in love, and Jada didn't respond to any of it, because she didn't need to. The video said everything. Tupac was gone, but he wasn't forgotten, not by the world, and certainly not by her. And as long as Jada is alive, as long as she's telling stories and making art, and raising her kids and living her life, Tupac is alive too, in her memories, in her grief, in the way she moves through the world, because that's what soulmates do. They change you, permanently, irrevocably, and even when they're gone, they're still there, in the choices you make, the words you speak, the way you love the people who come after. Tupac shaped Jada, and Jada carries him every single day, and will until the day she dies. Some love stories don't get happy endings, some don't even get to be called love stories, but that doesn't make them any less real, or any less forever. On September 13th, 1996, Jada Pinkett lost her soulmate. She was 25 years old, and the boy from Baltimore, who'd been her safe place, her truth-teller, her constant for 12 years, was gone. In the 29 years since, she's built a life, a family, a career, but there's a space inside her that will always belong to Tupac. The 3 a.m. phone calls, the letters from prison, the shared dreams about getting out of Baltimore and changing the world, the inside jokes, the unspoken understanding, the love that didn't need to be romantic to be the most important thing in her life. Jada has said she wouldn't change it, that even though losing Tupac broke her, knowing him made her, and she'd rather carry the grief of losing him than never have known him at all. Some people come into your life and change everything. They see you before the world does. They love you before you learn to love yourself. And when they're gone, they leave a mark so deep it becomes part of your DNA. Tupac was that person for Jada. Not her first love, not her last love, but her soul's love. The kind that doesn't end when the person dies. The kind that stays with you forever. And 29 years later, Jada Pinkett Smith is still carrying him, still missing him, still grieving the future they never got to have. And maybe that's the real story. Not the speculation about romance, not the debates about what they were or weren't, just the simple, devastating truth. She loved him, he loved her. And losing him was the kind of pain you never fully heal from. You just learn to breathe around it and keep going, because that's what he would have wanted, for her to keep going, to keep creating, to keep being Jada, the girl from Baltimore who became a star but never forgot where she came from, or the boy who saw her first. Some goodbyes last forever, and so does the love. The friend who knew you when you were still becoming. Drop their name below, let's remember them together.